Are you new to Canada or have family who want to immigrate? Are you a living caregiver rather, or temporary worker and don't know your rights? Then you can't miss today's Toronto Speaks Legal Advice. Welcome to Toronto Speaks Legal Advice. I'm your host, Natalka Falkmer. Tonight we're discussing the complex world of immigration, from work visas to citizenship applications to even sponsoring family members. I have the pleasure of welcoming a true leader in the field of immigration law and a champion of her clients' rights, Chantal Desloges. She not only founded Desloges Law Group, but she also founded an immigration and refugee law clinic, free law clinic a few years ago. Apart from Chantal's passion for helping her clients, she's also a Queen's Diamond Jubilee Award recipient for her outstanding contributions to Canada as an immigration lawyer and as a human rights advocate. Chantal has also been awarded the 2012 Canada Bar Association Young Lawyers Pro Bono Award in recognition of her outstanding legal services benefiting the community and for advocating on behalf of some of the most marginalized individuals in our society. Thank you so much, Chantal, for coming on. It truly is an honor for someone that not only advocates a lot for those that don't have the opportunity to do so themselves, but also taking the time to explain to me what is one of the most complex areas of law, immigration. And I would like to start from the top. There are different ways that one can come to Canada. There are different types of status we have in Canada. Let's begin with, how can I get to Canada on a semi-permanent as opposed to a permanent basis?
There are so many different immigration programs. If you look at all the federal immigration programs and add on the provincial immigration programs, there are about 80 ways that a person can come to Canada.
On a temporary basis or on both temporary and permanent?
On a temporary basis, those would be about half of those categories.
Wow.
So loosely they fall into three categories. One would be a visitor, so someone just coming as a tourist or maybe for a simple business meeting or something like that.
Okay.
Another way would be as a foreign student, so someone coming here to go to University of Toronto, for example.
Yes.
And then there are work permits, and so many different kinds of work permits of people that have been invited by Canadian companies to come and perform employment contracts, whether short-term or long-term. Those are the basic three categories, and within those, there are also subcategories.
Oh, I would imagine, again, this is a complex area. Well, one thing that you mentioned with respect to study, to coming here to study, can I study anything? Can I go to any college? Can I go to a bizarre one that no one's really heard of? Or are there actual standards in place of what I have to study or the places I have to go to school?
Yes, under the immigration regulations, they have things called designated learning institutions.
Okay.
Those are institutions which have been approved by the government as being recognized by them as a legitimate school. So if you go to a designated learning institution, one of the advantages is that if it's a publicly funded institution, eventually you'll be able to work after you graduate. Mm-hmm. And being able to work after graduation has a big benefit, because then you might be able to qualify for permanent immigration.
Oh, wow.
So it's always advisable to go to a designated learning institution. There are smaller institutions as well, where if you want to just study English or French in order to improve your language skills, things like that, you can go to those institutions as well.
But typically they probably wouldn't have that work placement, is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. There are less benefits after graduation than if you go to a recognized institution.
And to clarify, if I want to study here, do I have to do that work experience, or does that work experience have to apply, do another application to do that work experience? How does that work?
So when you come on a study permit, if you're attending a post-secondary institution, and it is a recognized one, you can work part-time while you're studying.
Okay.
And you can work full-time during the summer break and Christmas break, things like that. And then after graduation, this is where it becomes even more important. After graduation, there's a special kind of work permit called a postgraduate work permit.
And I have to apply after
you have to apply separately after you've finished your program of study. That's right.
How long does that take so how much leeway should I give myself? Let's say I'm in third year, fourth year is coming up. Should I be applying for that second sort of work permit, if you will?
Yeah, so as soon as you either graduate or get the letter from your college or university saying that you've completed all of your necessary course requirements for graduation, that triggers off your timeline, and there's only a 90-day time frame in which you can apply for your permit. And if you miss that window, then you're out of luck.
Out of luck can't say on compassionate grounds, please let me stay.
Every single program of immigration has the ability to ask for humanitarian and compassionate exemptions, but for something like this, it would be highly unlikely to be granted.
To succeed, right? Well, now that we'll go through the life cycle of a person, the work part. So we talked a little bit about work visas, and we were speaking before the camera started to roll how it's been a little bit more difficult, or the threshold's been increased as far as getting a work visa to come here and work for X amount of time, years, months. Could we talk about the different types of applications, the work applications that you can have, as well as the maximum amount of time I could stay underneath one, and so on. So I'll throw it to you.
Sure. So the basic thing that people should understand about work permits is that the system is set up so that Canadian people get the jobs first.
Okay.
So you don't want to set up a situation where employers in Canada are looking for foreign labor that may be less expensive or pushing down the employment standards that we have here in Canada.
Right.
So that's the general rule, is that the jobs go to Canadian people first.
But that's the responsibility of the employer to make sure, right? That's not on me, the employee.
Right, that's absolutely correct. So there are a lot of exceptions to that rule. So some of those exceptions may be due to international agreements like NAFTA.
Okay.
So there are special exemptions for American citizens in certain types of occupations that, they don't need to prove that they can't find anybody here in Canada.
What's one?
Well, for example, a NAFTA professional would be certain types of engineering occupations,
Okay.
Management consultants, that kind of thing. There's a whole list of a lot of different professions that qualify.
Okay.
But for the majority of people, if you don't fall under one of those exceptions, the employer, before they offer you the job, has to go through a system called the Labor Market Impact Assessment.
Okay.
And in order to get one of those, the employer has to show to the federal government that they have tried all across Canada to fill this position, and they can't find anybody who's here already to fill that position, whether because they're not qualified to do so or whether because there's a labor shortage. And that's a very tough test to be able to meet, unless the person is highly specialized or unique, or you're living in an area like, for example, in northern Canada,
Right.
where there's a labor shortage.
Oh, right. So it wouldn't be that I have to, let's say, add the extra expense of having someone come down here. So, for example, what I'm trying to say is that, let's say I live in, North Bay, or even somewhere further north where there is a smaller population. Would it be permissible to say, well, yeah, there's a small pool in Alberta that I could maybe have come up here. It would cost me X amount more dollars, and therefore that doesn't qualify? Or does the cost that the employer, am put in really matter if I have to pay more, for example?
Right. So the labor market impact assessment process is all about showing the government that you've done your level best to recruit locally. So you have to advertise that position across Canada for at least 1 month and keep your ads going as you're going through the process.
Oh, wow.
Now, if there was a small pool of labor in Alberta and none of them applied for the job because they didn't want to move to your area, then as an employer, that's not your responsibility. If you've advertised it and you've made that job available for everyone realistically and genuinely,
Yes.
then if nobody applies for that position, then that would be a situation where you could go through the LMIA process.
And with respect to work visas, what type of areas would be the most successful? So let's say I'm in, France, for example, and I want to come here on a temporary basis to work. What would be the most successful type of jobs, that I should apply for if I can?
Right, so if you don't fall under one of the exceptions, then basically any kind of technical occupation where there is a shortage of people here in Canada available to do that. For example, certain types of computer engineering or software engineering, where it's not that there's nobody in the world that can do it, but the number of people is very few.
Yes.
Or you have someone who's uniquely qualified. They have some special skill, like for example, maybe they're an artist of some kind, or something unique that's not generally available in the market.
Right.
Another really common one is cooks of ethnic foods.
Really?
So for example, if I'm a cook from northern India that has a special type of cuisine, there are not a lot of people here in Canada who know how to cook that food and are willing to work in a kitchen here in Canada.
Wow.
So that would be a common one as well.
I did not know that. Well, you do hear a lot of that type of labor being in short supply. And if I may just change hats to something that's a little bit similar to this, living caregivers, is that another status that's protected underneath the work visa application process? What is
Right.
that? Tell me a
So
bit about that.
there aren't any living caregivers anymore. The government changed the regulations about 2 years ago now.
Tell me, why is that?
Well, there was some concern that there may be exploitation of caregivers that are coming in, and they didn't want to force those people necessarily to live with the employer if that's not what they wanted to do.
Yes.
So you can still negotiate that together with your employer as a term of your contract if both of you are consenting to that arrangement, but the employer can't force you to live in. But there is a special category of work permits for people who are caregivers.
Right.
Those would be people who either take care of children or take care of people with high medical needs or elderly people. They have to also go through that same labor market impact assessment process.
Okay.
But it's easier for the employers to prove that there aren't that many people in Canada willing to do that job, because
Yes.
that's generally known that that's the case.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
It's not attractive to a lot of Canadians to do that kind of work.
So that would be another successful area, if you will.
Yes.
You know, now moving a little bit on to the notion from, okay, you know, temporary, so a temporary staying here for a short period of time. What's the longest actually someone could stay under any of those categories as a temporary resident?
Many of the categories don't have a specific limit. However, practically speaking, you do reach a limit, because if you are a visitor or a foreign student or a worker, those are all supposed to be temporary categories. So one of the tests that you have to meet legally is that the visa officer who gives you that permit has
Right.
to believe that you are going to eventually leave Canada and go back home. So if your pattern is such that you've been in Canada for an exceedingly long time and not showing any signs of going home at a certain point, there reaches a logical limit, not a specific number, but a logical limit where the officer will say, look, you know, you're not really temporary here anymore. Either apply for permanent residence or go
You gotta
home.
go.
Exactly.
And-
And there are certain work permits as well that have limits on them.
Oh, like which ones?
Well, for example, there are certain work permits and certain skill levels where you can only stay for a maximum period of 4 years.
Oh, like
Then-
do you know anyone offhand, or?
Yeah, so we have someone, for example, a cook who had maxed out the 4-year limit and is now capped out, and if he's not able to transition himself into permanent residence, is going to have to end up going back home, which is very unfortunate.
Is there, so let's say I'm in that scenario, I'm in that particular scenario you just described. How fast do I have to move to get my permanent residency, and how do I even do that? What is a permanent residency? Do I need that before I become a citizen? It's a confusing world.
Yeah.
So PR, what is that all about? How do I get one? And how long do I have from the temporary status kind of being over to applying for a PR?
Right, so the advantage, of course, to applying for permanent residence is that once you get it, you have a whole host of rights that you don't have when you're temporary. So, for
Okay.
example, you have the right to stay here and live here forever as long as you obey all of the conditions.
What are the conditions?
Well, the conditions, for example, would be not to get certain types of criminal convictions, that you have to stay in the country for a certain period of time. You know, after you become a permanent resident, you can't go away for huge periods of time without coming back generally. And it's 730 days within any 5-year time frame. So you have to spend 2 out of 5 years within every 5-year time frame within Canada.
Doesn't matter if I do a couple of days here, a couple of days there, so long as that number adds up after 5 years.
Right, it's cumulative, not consecutive. So
Good.
if I stay for 6 months and suppose I want to go back to my home country for a year and then come back for another 6 months, you can add it all together as long as you comply with the 730 days.
Perfect.
So, but other than very limited categories like that, your permanent status is just that, it's permanent. So you don't have to worry about renewing permits all the time. You know, you don't have to worry about someone asking you to leave the country unexpectedly.
Yeah.
You can also then start to accumulate your time that you need to go for citizenship, which will allow you to become Canadian and carry a Canadian passport, vote in the elections. Another advantage of being a permanent resident is that you would get access to health care.
Oh, you don't as a PR?
As a permanent resident, you do.
Oh, you
but
do?
certain types of temporary residents, often you don't.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
And your kids can go to school and get subsidized education and pay domestic student fees when they go to university, which as a temporary resident, you can't get those benefits.
Oh, wow. So now with respect to being a permanent resident, you can't vote, is that correct? You cannot-
Correct, you can't vote.
Can't vote. Now let's say I get my PR, and you know I'm happy, satisfied. I stay here long. You know I stay here, and I don't really care about citizenship. Is that something that you would say? You know what? Think twice about that. Maybe citizenship is valuable, or is it not applicable to certain people?
Well, I always encourage everyone to go for citizenship at the earliest opportunity, because you never know where life takes you. You could be sitting there and thinking, I'm a permanent resident, you know what, I'm living in Canada, I'm not getting into any trouble, I don't really want to do it, I'm fine as a permanent resident. But what if something happened in your future where you did get into trouble? God forbid if you got into some criminal trouble. A lot of people would say that would never happen to me, but I say never because you never know. And also, what if something happened that required you to be outside of the country for an extended period of time? What if you got married to someone overseas? What if your mother, who lives back in your home country, suddenly became ill and you had to go and live abroad for an extended period of time? What if you got a job offer in the United Arab Emirates and you're making really good money over there and you're going to be gone for a while? All of those things can happen.
You know, that's a very, very good point to make. And in addition to that, I would assume that just gives a little bit more of that peace of mind. But I think I want to circle back a little bit. With respect to the movement from temporary to permanent, how much of a gap do I have to file? I don't know if we touched upon that. So my visa I'm studying, I did my little work term, I'm staying. I've extended as much as possible. I'm in trouble now. I need to file. Am I too late at a certain point? What are the deadlines?
Well, so the way that you apply for immigration as an economic immigrant nowadays is through a system called express entry. So you can't just decide one day, wake up and say, you know what, I think I'd like to apply for permanent residence today. You can't do that anymore. You have to be invited to apply for permanent residence.
Really?
How do you do that? You participate in express entry. So that express entry is an online system where you go in, you enter all of your qualifications, you tell them all about yourself, and the computer assigns you a certain ranking score. So it's a numeric score depending on how good is your language skill, how old are you, how high is your education, what's your work experience. All those things are graded and you're given certain points.
Yes.
The computer gives you a ranking score. Then you're put into a selection pool with everybody else who's also interested in applying for economic immigration. And it doesn't matter when you put your name in. What matters is what your score is.
Yes.
So, for example, the average score for most people who are selected is 450 points plus. So you have to have more than 450 realistically to have a good chance of being competitive. So exactly. So if you have 450 points and everybody else in the selection pool has 449, then congratulations, you're number one. You're going to get your invitation really fast.
Right.
But if everybody else has 451 and you're 450, then you're the last person in the pool. So it's a ranking system, and it introduces a little bit of uncertainty because you're never 100% sure if you're going to be invited. So the earlier someone can put themselves into the selection pool, the better it is.
Oh, wow.
And in order to get into the selection pool, you have to qualify basically for one of the immigration programs. And there are a lot of them. But for most people, it would be something like either Canadian Experience Class or perhaps
and what's that mean?
Federal Skilled Worker. So Canadian Experience Class is for people who have already been working in Canada on a work permit for a certain period of time.
Okay. What's the period of time typically?
It's a minimum of 1 year in order to qualify. And there's a lot of extra detail around that. But to make it short, 1 year of working.
There's always details and it's law.
Yeah, and a lot of people who are in that category are foreign students who came here and graduated from universities or colleges and then worked for a year. Then you have Federal Skilled Worker, which doesn't require that you have to have worked in Canada, but you could count up your education and your foreign work experience, and if you rank high enough within Express Entry, you may be invited as well.
And there are other categories you were saying as well, or is that
so
the top one?
Canadian Experience Class, Federal Skilled Worker are the top two. There's also one called Federal Skilled Trades. That's for people who may not have a high degree of education, but they're a plumber or a tradesperson, which is in high demand.
Yes.
The other thing, to make it even more complicated, is that a lot of the provinces of Canada also have access to this selection pool. So no matter how many points you have in Express Entry, if a province goes into the pool and is looking around for certain people, say a plumber, say they really need plumbers in New Brunswick, New Brunswick can go in and look for people that are plumbers and issue them an invitation to apply provincially. And if you get approved there, you get 600 bonus points. And so you're guaranteed to be invited to apply once you have that.
If I have, let's say, 600 bonus points, assuming that everyone has fewer, how long of a process from, okay, I've now applied, to getting that, the next step?
Right, so when you're in the selection pool, before you get your invitation, you're not considered to be an applicant at all. You've just expressed an interest to apply. Once you get that invitation, they only give you 60 days to submit your complete 100% documented application. That's a
Pause right there.
short period.
Paperwork. This is where I think the lawyer comes in quite handy.
Exactly.
Could I just pause right there now? In that step, where do you see the biggest mistakes?
Well, there are two biggest mistakes. First of all, people who are not ready when the invitation comes in and they are lagging behind in terms of getting work references for jobs that they've had before. Like maybe I worked in Saudi Arabia 5 years ago. To get a reference letter from my employer, that's going to take time.
Yeah.
And then they don't get their documents in on time. The second most popular one is that when people have their work references drafted, the work references have to be done in a very specific way. Immigration is looking for certain information in that reference letter. And if that information is not there, or the employer has just written a reference letter however they wanted to do it, it's not going to meet the requirements, and then you're going to end up getting rejected.
Wow.
And you've got 60 days to pull all of that together. So that's where a lawyer can come in really handy.
To make sure.
Yeah, because we will know. I mean, if someone, for example, if someone has 480 points in the ranking system,
Right.
we know that they're pretty much definitely going to get invited in a
Right.
short period of time. So
Right.
we can start getting that stuff ready ahead of time.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then once you get your application in,
Right.
our experience is that most people are getting their permanent residence in only about 7 months,
7 months.
which is really fast.
Now let's say, can I still stay in Canada? Let's say my visa's expired during that process?
It depends how far into the process you are at the time the
Okay.
visa expires. So there's something
Okay.
called a bridging open work permit, where if you're here working and you've received your invitation to apply and you've already put in your application,
Yes.
you can apply for an open work permit to cover you during that waiting time.
Okay.
But if you haven't reached that stage, if you're still sitting in the selection pool, then you're out of luck.
You got to go.
Some people have to leave, yes.
So it seems to me that a lot of this, the knack to this, the trick to this is to be on top of it, to make sure that you're paying attention to your days, giving yourself enough leeway, and making sure that you know exactly what all the ins and outs happen to be.
That's
And
right.
we were talking about a little bit of a story that happened today with respect to a permanent resident.
Yes,
Yes, tell me about that. Now, good lesson.
It's something that literally just happened this morning, and this is unfortunately a very common problem. What we were talking about before, that permanent residents who something unexpected happens in their life and they end up going abroad and not being able to come back within the time frame that they should. So I was approached by a family earlier today that was in that situation. Had been sitting abroad for a period of time, and in particular there was a young man who was university age, and they had realized that they were in violation of the residency requirement and wanted to file an appeal here in Canada, and gone ahead and done all of that without consulting a professional. So they had got to a certain stage, and in conversing with him, I said, well, you know, you're still a permanent resident while you're waiting for your appeal to come through. And he was absolutely shocked. He said, what do you mean I've been rejected? I said, no, you were found in violation of your obligation, but while you're appealing, you're still a permanent resident. So you actually could have come back. And he said, well, I don't have a PR card. I said, well, don't you have a U.S. visa? And he did have a U.S. visa. So at any time in the last 2 years while he's been waiting for his appeal, he could have just got on a plane, flown into the U.S., and driven across the Canadian border. He lost 2 years of his life stuck outside in another country simply because he didn't know that small piece of information.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
So again, it's making sure you actually understand and engage someone just to get that piece of information.
Yeah, I mean, people can represent themselves, and if you have a super straightforward case and absolutely nothing goes wrong, then some people can be successful at that. But the problem is you never know until it's too late. It's like insurance. Well,
Yes.
you know, you can go without insurance, but what if you have an accident? And then
Yes.
by then it's too late. You can't backtrack.
And it's a big issue typically. So it's, when those calamities happen, it's never small, it's large.
Right.
Well, speaking about getting representation, we've sort of changed the rules around as to who can represent who. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because you were mentioning it, there was a recent case where someone that was claiming to help immigrants was defrauding them. So tell me a little bit about that and what I should look out for if I'm someone who's trying to make an application and needs some help.
Right. So there are only two categories of people in Canada that are legally allowed to represent you or give you any kind of paid advice for
Okay.
immigration. So even if you go to someone just for a consultation, even if they don't file your application for you, these rules still apply. That would be either a lawyer that is called to the bar in any province of Canada,
Okay.
or a registered licensed immigration consultant, which has they're regulated by an organization called the Immigration Consultants of Canada Regulatory Council,
Right.
ICCRC.
Good memory.
Only those two categories of people. So not a foreign lawyer called to the bar in another country, or not somebody who just went to law school but didn't get called to the bar.
Yes.
And not somebody who might call themselves a consultant but actually doesn't have the proper license. And they should be able to show you paperwork to prove it. There was a case that just came in the media earlier this week, a man from Ottawa who was not a licensed consultant, who helped a lot of people to come to Canada successfully, but then it turned out that a lot of the documents that he used were fraudulent.
Oh, wow.
So not only is he probably going to end up in jail if he gets found guilty, but also what's going to happen to those hundreds of people that came in on those fraudulent documents? They could be deported. So penny wise but pound foolish sometimes.
Absolutely.
You know, that people think that if someone's making them big promises of things that they can do, and if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
So basically flag it by saying, okay, first of all, ask for qualifications.
Right.
A lawyer should be able to show their LSU, Law Society number, insurance, etc. Perhaps even get some references involved.
Right.
And for someone that's regulated along that long list, that long name, ICCRC, I believe,
Right.
What is it that I should ask of them?
Well, they should have a license number from that organization, and there's a website, ICCRC website, where you can go on and type in a person's name or their license number, and it will show whether they're a member in good standing.
Excellent.
So it's so easy to check. Anybody sitting in their living room with a computer can do it.
Oh, fabulous. And then that's a good thing, because we want to make sure that we avoid having those scenarios where people are very vulnerable when they come here. They don't have the language.
Right.
We have about 40 seconds before we're done, if you can imagine it. Any take-it-home advice, one nugget of gold, if you will, to give to the audience at home? You know, something that you find is important for us to remember.
I would say the number one thing whenever you're dealing with any kind of immigration matter, honesty is the best policy. Dishonest information will come back to bite you in the end. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point, the risk is not worth it. There are so many legal ways to immigrate. Don't fall into the trap of doing anything shady.
That's fabulous, because we frequently overlook things and little details. Oh, doesn't really matter. You know, who's going to ever know about that? And as you said, in law, things always come up. And that's a great piece of advice, as well as all those websites and all that other confusing, you've elucidated a confusing area. Again, thank you so much, and that's all the time we have today. Thank you, Chantal Desloges, for helping Torontonians make sense of the law. Remember, know your rights, and if you don't, then watch us next time to get free legal information. After all, the best things in life are free. I'm your host, Natalka Falcomer, and thank you for watching Toronto Speaks Legal Advice.